Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for your area. Also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Give me updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll talk about an issue that we are having with our website right now. We're going through some maintenance on the website, and that is resulting in some data outage for some forecast products. Now, we do have our watches, warnings, advisories that are going out are still current, and the forecast is largely making it to the web. However, if you are happening to click on the map that's on the website, there might be some issues with getting the most current forecast. So you still have the option to go up into the top left of the screen and type in your city, and then it should find your forecast just fine. Or you can go to this address at the bottom of the screen now. That's weather.gov/ARH/media forecast resource. And you can then access the map to get the accurate point forecast through that means. And also our hourly forecast data is currently unavailable. This is a known problem and we are working on it to get it resolved as soon as possible. We also have for the south central area some rain coming in, quite a bit different from what we've had over the last week. We've started to get some more cloud cover, but now we're going to start to get some more rain with the cloud cover. So for today on Tuesday, we're having some sunshine come across the state, which is leading to some instability. That's going to result into the potential for thunderstorm activity, especially off of the mountains and in areas further inland. Like the Copper River Basin is one of those areas that we're targeting to see some afternoon thunderstorms today. Then on Wednesday, we're going to get a different type of precipitation, a little bit more stratiform coming in. That's going to bring more widespread rain to the area. Resulting in rain throughout much of the south central area, including just under an inch of precip expected for the Anchorage area. Taking a look at our fire danger, with that rain coming in, we're not expecting as much fire threat in south central Alaska, but as we look further to the north in the Yukon Flats area, expecting high fire danger, out to the east of the area near the Bettles area, expecting high fire danger, and then interior locations of the North Slope expecting high fire danger as well, and in the northern locations of the Lynn Canal area as we get up closer towards Haines and Skagway. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, we'll start off with the old boundary that's been moving through the western portion of the state, starting to shear apart now as we look out over the western portions of the interior, associated with the low out over northeastern Russia. And then another wave off of that system moving into the northern portions of the Bering Sea, bringing in some precipitation out towards the west coast of the state. Taking a look again, we'll look at a low pressure system moving through the southern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing cloud cover to the Panhandle area. And then finally, we'll look at a system approaching the western Aleutians from the North Pacific, starting to bring rain closer towards the islands. As we look at our weather for the remainder of the day, we can see that system south of the islands, bringing in that warm air from the south. But out ahead of that, we have some areas of fog underneath high pressure that is centered over the eastern Aleutian Islands, extending that ridging out over much of the Bering Sea, resulting in fog and stratus underneath that ridging for the Aleutians, the Bering Sea, and much of the west coast of the state. Some of those areas are mixing with rain, and we'll start to mix more with rain as we get to the YK Delta areas and into the Seward Peninsula area. We have a roll boundary pushing through the western portions of the interior, bringing showers to the area, and as we get to the central interior, we are expecting afternoon and evening thunderstorms. That's going to push up into the Brooks Range as well, and down into south central areas, especially those northern areas in the Copper River Basin. Along the Arctic coastline, high pressure out over the Arctic is bringing in some fog to the area. And then as we stretch down into the Panhandle, we are going to see some showers continuing for today. As we look into tonight, those showers will linger throughout the Panhandle area and extend up along the North Gulf Coast into south central Alaska. We're going to see those thunderstorms drop off this evening, but showers will continue through much of the night, and we'll see showers throughout much of the central and western portions of the interior, and starting to transition over to a more stratiform rain as we get along the west coast and mixing with fog as well from the Seward Peninsula area down into the Bristol Bay area, and then rain and fog throughout much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, and our frontal system continuing to bring up more moisture from the south towards the central and western Aleutians. And then way up to the north in the Arctic coastline, high pressure continuing to allow fog development along much of the area from the Utqiagvik area further to the east. On Wednesday, we'll see continued high pressure out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians. More fog is expected, mixing with rain from much of the islands down into the Alaska Peninsula and up much of the west coast into the Kotzebue Sound area. As we push further inland, once again, we are expecting that to be more showery. That's going to extend in much of southwest Alaska through the south central area and up into the interior. However, as we get into the central and northern portions of the interior, expecting afternoon thunderstorm development. That's going to be true in the Brooks Range as well. Then along the Arctic coastline, expecting to see some fog up there, and then down in the Panhandle area, expecting to see continued showers and onshore flow. On Thursday, continuing to see more heavy rain for the Panhandle areas. We have the low pressure system out over the Gulf, pulling up more moisture from the south. That rain is going to extend into south central Alaska and start to give the potential for thunderstorms as we get into the Alaska Range and into the central and northern portions of the interior, to include the Yukon Flats area. Then as we look out to the west coast, starting to see some of the precipitation clear up, but we will still see fog, especially in the morning along the west coast from the Point Hope area down through the Seward Peninsula and much of the YK Delta, and high pressure will remain out over the Bering Sea, extending down into the eastern Aleutians, but our frontal system starting to push now closer and closer towards the islands, bringing more rain to the central and western Aleutians. Taking a look at our temperatures for Wednesday morning, starting off over the Aleutian Islands, temperatures will drop down into the mid-40s, upper 40s as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, around 50 degrees for the Bristol Bay area, and mid to upper 40s for much of the YK Delta area, extending up into the Seward Peninsula as well, and then drifting into western portions of the interior. As we get to central and eastern portions of the interior, temperatures dropping down into the 50s, and then along much of the Arctic coastline dropping down into the mid to lower 30s. Down in south central Alaska, temperatures dropping into the lower to mid 50s, and then down in the Panhandle area also into the lower to mid 50s. Wednesday afternoon highs expected to get up into the lower 60s for the Panhandle, lower to mid 60s for much of south central Alaska, mid 60s to mid 70s for the interior, getting warmer as we get further to the west, getting up around 60 degrees for the western portions of the interior, then in the 50s for much of the west coast of the state. Along the Arctic coastline from Utqiagvik east, we are going to see temperatures dropping down into the upper 30s, but warmer to the west. Down the Bristol Bay area into the mid 60s for those highs, and then into the mid to upper 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and into the 50s for much of the Aleutians. Thursday morning lows dropping down into the mid 40s for the Aleutians, into the mid to upper 40s for all of southwest Alaska and western interior Seward Peninsula areas, down into the 30s for the Arctic coastline, and then into the central and eastern portions of the interior, dropping down into the 50s, into the 50s for south central Alaska, and the lower 50s also for the Panhandle. For Thursday afternoon highs, temperatures getting back up into the 60s for much of the Panhandle, mid to upper 60s for much of the southern portions of south central, into the 70s for more interior locations, 70s for much of the interior portions of mainland Alaska, then in the 60s much of the west coast, into the 40s for areas along the Arctic coastline, and into the 50s for much of the Aleutian Islands, with 56 degrees for St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Wednesday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread IFR conditions are expected. Those IFR conditions are going to extend in over much of the west coast of the state and southwest Alaska, with some areas making it into western portions of the interior. MVFR conditions will also be present, especially down in the south central area and along the water, then out towards the Alaska Panhandle as well, where we will see a mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions, with the exception of very far to the north locations such as Northern Lynn Canal. We'll see VFR conditions. Then all the way up north on the Arctic coastline, we will see a mixture of MVFR and IFR as well. Moving into Wednesday afternoon, staying up on the Arctic coastline, MVFR and IFR conditions will persist. Down in the interior portions of the state, eastern locations will see primarily VFR. We'll see more MVFR conditions as we move further to the west. And then all the way along the west coast of the state, primarily IFR conditions that will extend down into the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. For south central Alaska, places near the water will see primarily IFR conditions, where we'll get to better conditions as we get further to the north. And then down in the Panhandle, primarily MVFR conditions with some IFR along the water, and then some VFR conditions as we get further to the north. Thursday morning, staying in the Panhandle area, widespread IFR conditions. The only exception is Northern Lynn Canal, where we will see some MVFR conditions. South central Alaska, higher elevations, and near the Gulf, we'll see primarily MVFR conditions with VFR conditions at lower locations that are further inland. In the interior, primarily VFR conditions. Southern locations will see some MVFR, and then along the Arctic coastline, IFR and MVFR conditions are expected. Down the west coast of the state, this is also going to be true, especially in the YK Delta area. We'll see more IFR conditions, and then MVFR and IFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutians. Thursday afternoon is going to continue to see MVFR and IFR conditions through the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Much of the mainland part of the state will have cleared up and see VFR conditions. However, right along the west coast of the state, we will see some MVFR conditions with a mix of MVFR and IFR along the Arctic coastline. Then down in the Panhandle area, going to see primarily MVFR conditions, including Yakutat, except for areas far north in the Lynn Canal area where we will continue to see VFR conditions. Taking a look now at the passes, starting up north in the Brooks Range, AKwx Pass will be VFR throughout the day on Wednesday. However, there is potential for thunderstorms in the mountains as we get into the afternoon hours. Then for Adigan Pass, also going to see VFR throughout the day, but once again, potential for thunderstorms in the afternoon in the mountains. For Lake Clark and Merrill, we're expecting to see MVFR conditions throughout the day on Wednesday. Rainy Pass will start off IFR and improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon, as well as Windy Pass. Isabel will be VFR throughout the day on Wednesday, as well as at Mentasta Pass. Tanita will be in marginal conditions for all day on Wednesday. And Portage will start off in VFR, drop down to IFR conditions in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White are both expected to be VFR throughout the day Wednesday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have an area of cooler air coming down the west coast of the state, extending down over southwest Alaska with those 8,000 foot freezing levels, but warmer air to the south and west. We have an area of 14,000 foot freezing levels out by the western Aleutian Islands. And as we look down at our icing, starting off over the YK Delta area up by St. Lawrence Island, above 7,000 feet of icing is expected, and above 8,000 feet just to the east of the Copper River Basin. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is 115 knots out of a west to northwest direction, moving through the Bristol Bay area, coming down from the central and northern portions of the Bering Sea, then heading out over the Alaska Peninsula, dropping down to around 90 knots over the peninsula, and exiting out over the Gulf at around 75 knots. Another area of winds coming in over the western portions of mainland Alaska, 50 knots out of a southeasterly direction, and then moving around a low just to the east of the Copper River Basin, around 60 knots out of a northeasterly direction, becoming northwesterly, 55 knots for northern portions of the Panhandle. Down to 9,000 feet, pretty weak flow for the Panhandle area and much of mainland Alaska until we get down over the eastern portions of the Bering Sea, northwesterly winds up to size 35 knots, moving over the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, more westerly, 35 to 40 knots is expected. Just to the south of the western Aleutian Islands, southeasterly winds around 35 knots, and then one lighter area around 20 knots out over the northwestern portions of the state out of a southeasterly direction. Down to 3,000 feet, strongest winds once again are going to be out over the southwestern portion of the state, northwesterly winds 25 knots out over the Bristol Bay area, get up to a size 30 to 40 knots as we get around Kodiak Island, and then southeasterly winds 30 knots to 45 knots near the western Aleutians. Finally, for our turbulence, an area of turbulence where we saw those stronger winds around Kodiak Island, especially through the gaps there, we're expecting below 5,000 feet to encompass all of the island and some of the Aleutian range as well.
It can be many miles long, from 1 to 100 feet high, traveling at 400 miles per hour. This ocean monster is known as a tsunami, and it can wreak havoc on coastal populations and landscapes. A tsunami is a series of ocean waves caused by any large and sudden disturbance of the sea surface. Tsunamis can be generated by landslides, volcanic eruptions, or even meteorite impacts in the ocean, but they are most often caused by an earthquake where there's a sudden displacement of the ocean floor. When that happens, there's a transfer of energy from the sea floor to the ocean, causing waves on the surface to radiate outward in all directions. In deep waters, these waves may not even be detectable. But when the tsunami enters shallower waters, the wave speed slows and its height increases. The water along the coast may recede noticeably. A large wall of turbulent water, called a bore, may also form. When the tsunami hits, it may come ashore like a fast-rising flood and strike with devastating force. The series of waves may continue for hours. The first one may not be the last or the largest. For your safety, know the potential warning signs of an incoming tsunami. A strong earthquake that causes difficulty standing. A rapid rise or fall of the water along the coast. A loud ocean roar. When you're in a coastal area, it's important to keep alert for messages from local officials, such as lifeguards, police, the U.S. Tsunami Warning Centers, and NOAA All Hazards Radio. If you find yourself in a location of a tsunami strike, here's what you need to do to stay safe. Keep calm. Walk or run to higher ground, 100 feet above sea level or 1 mile inland. Do not drive. Keep roads open for emergency vehicles. If you cannot move to higher ground, use the stairs to get to the 3rd floor or higher in a sturdy building. Follow all instructions from local officials and stay out of coastal areas until authorities issue an all clear. Tsunamis can strike any coastline in the world and can affect locations thousands of miles away from where they formed. They may be uncommon, but the devastation they cause makes them a deadly force in nature. For more information on tsunamis, go to the following sites.
Tsunami, a killer wave, speeding across the ocean at 400 miles an hour. It smashes into land, destroying everything in its path. Tsunamis do not have a season, but they can strike any coast at any time. If one forms close to the shore, the shaking of the earth and a loud roar may warn of its approach. But when a tsunami forms across the ocean, it can take hours to reach the shore, enough time to warn people to move to higher land. Over the past 20 years, NOAA has developed DART, a real-time monitoring system that provides data for forecasting tsunamis. The DART systems have been deployed in earthquake-prone areas throughout the ocean, including the Pacific and Indian basins. A DART system combines a surface buoy and a sensor on the ocean floor. This sensor detects changes in water pressure and seismic activity and transmits the data back to the surface. If these changes indicate a tsunami may form, the buoy signals an alert via satellite to the tsunami warning centers in Alaska and Hawaii. Back at the centers, scientists plug the data into pre-existing models. These models predict the height, the arrival time, and the coastal locations that the tsunami will hit. Watches and warnings are issued to the affected communities so preparations can begin. Today, 47 DART stations are positioned all around the world, ready to detect and warn coastal communities about the next potential tsunami. With the DART system and tsunami warning centers in place, we are now better prepared to predict a killer wave before it strikes.
December 26, 2004. What began as an undersea earthquake in the Indian Ocean ended as the most deadly tsunami in recorded history, with nearly 240,000 lives lost. This was a devastating wake-up call to coastal communities and tsunami research. Prior to this event, only 6 of NOAA's Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunami, or DART, buoys were in place. Scientists could only predict tsunami arrival times, not flood potential. And there was not a global tsunami warning system. Today, 10 years later, we can tell a different story. U.S. and international coastlines are far better prepared for such a catastrophe, thanks in large part to research and technology developed at the NOAA Center for Tsunami Research at Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory. NOAA's DART array is now complete, With 39 buoys operated by the National Weather Service's National Data Buoy Center. Along with 21 international buoys, this array can measure a tsunami wave as small as 1 centimeter in the open ocean and provide these data in real time to forecast when a tsunami may hit the coast and how much flooding there will be. NOAA scientists and engineers are currently testing the 4th-generation DART buoy that will be able to measure local tsunamis as well as distant ones. Flooding forecast models incorporate local topography and historical tsunami data in order to more accurately predict exactly how a tsunami might behave when it reaches shore. NOAA has 75 site-specific models that can provide high-resolution flooding forecasts for effective response and mitigation during a tsunami event. NOAA has gathered data from every tsunami since 2004 to improve its forecast models. Today, it operates the world's only real-time tsunami flooding forecast system using DART data to accurately compute flooding forecasts. The NOAA Tsunami Warning Centers make tsunami data available on the internet and issue advisories, watches, and warnings through the Emergency Alert System and via NOAA weather radios. While it is impossible to prevent a tsunami, we are now much better prepared to detect them and predict their paths and impacts, so those in coastal communities can take the steps necessary to safely protect themselves.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section of the forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. We do have westerly movement of the ice in the Chukchi Sea, and otherwise along the Arctic coastline between AKwx and Prudhoe Bay area, we still have some of that thicker ice, but it is continuing to melt off. Down in southeast Alaska, in the inside waters, we have south to southeast flow 5 to 10 knots in the central and southern locations. And as we get up into the Lynn Canal area, southerly winds 15 knots are expected. Out over the Gulf, variable winds 5 to 10 knots for the most part, becoming more southerly as we get into the northern portions of the Gulf. As we move into Thursday, winds are going to pick up, especially out over the Gulf waters. Southeasterly winds 15 knots, increasing to as high as 20 knots out of the east and northern locations. In the inside waters, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots are expected. For the south central area, starting out over the Gulf, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots for the northern locations. And as we get closer towards the Barren Islands, stronger winds are expected. Westerly flow 25 to 30 knots, strongest to the west of the Barren Islands. Seas as high as 8 feet, also west of the Barrens. Then in Prince William Sound area, easterly winds 10 knots and northwest winds 10 to 15 knots for Cook Inlet. As we move into Thursday, Cook Inlet winds still going to be northwesterly around 10 knots. And then winds around the Barren Islands, west to northwest, 20 knots are expected. Out over the Gulf, becoming more northerly, 15 to 20 knots, and then eventually becoming more easterly at 20 knots as we get into the northerly locations. Out over Prince William Sound, northwest winds, 10 knots expected. For Wednesday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, all winds are going to be out of the west, increasing from 15 knots around the peninsula to around 25 knots east of Kodiak Island. Then on Thursday, we are going to see winds all out of the northwesterly directions, 20 to 25 knots in all locations, strongest just to the south of Kodiak Island, with seas also the highest south of Kodiak Island up to as high as 7 feet. Then on Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands, east to northeast winds, weakest out east around 10 knots, picking up to as high as 20 to 25 knots as we get closer towards the western Aleutian Islands. Seas also the highest out there at around 7 feet. As we move into Thursday, primarily easterly winds 15 to 20 knots, seas highest once again by the western Aleutians up to as high as 7 feet, and then for the eastern Aleutian Islands, a little bit different flow out of the north, 15 knots is expected. For Wednesday along the west coast, most locations are going to see westerly winds 10 to 15 knots. The exception is down by the Pribilof Islands that'll see southerly winds around 10 knots. And as we move into Thursday, north to northwest winds all along the coastline 10 to 15 knots for the most part, getting a little stronger south of Nunavik Island up to as high as 20 knots there. Out by St. Matthew Island, westerly winds are expected 15 knots, and then northwest winds by the Pribilof Islands at 15 knots. Up along the Arctic coast on Wednesday, we're going to see primarily easterly winds around 15 knots, continuing to be east to northeast down the west coast of the state, 10 to 15 knots, until we get to the Bering Strait area where we'll see westerly winds 15 knots there. Then on Thursday, primarily a northerly component along the west coast, 15 to 20 knots, and the north winds 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coastline, getting weaker as we get further to the east. Recap of our weather for tonight. We have high pressure dominating the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, resulting in a mixture of fog and rain for the Aleutians, the Bering Sea, and much of the west coast of the state up to the Seward Peninsula area. As we get more to inland locations, we are expecting primarily to see showers for much of southwest Alaska, south central, and western portions of the interior and up the northwest coastline. We do have some thunderstorms in this afternoon, but we do expect those to diminish throughout the evening hours, especially for the remainder of the nighttime period. And then along the Arctic coastline, high pressure is dominating the area, resulting in some areas of fog. We're also going to experience some showers down in the Panhandle area. And then on Wednesday, lingering showers all day on Wednesday for the Panhandle. Going to see continued rain for much of south central area, starting to be more steady as we get into Wednesday time period for the Cook Inlet area. And we're going to see some thunderstorms in the central and northern portions of the interior and into the Brooks Range. Then as we push further to the west in the state, we're going to see those showers start to change over to some more stratiform rain, as a mixture of rain and fog is going to be along the coastline from the Kotzebue Sound area down into the Bristol Bay area and extending out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, as we have our high pressure remaining out over the Bering. Then up along the Arctic coastline, high pressure remains there as well, resulting in more fog for the area. As we move into Thursday, high pressure continuing out over the Bering Sea, but a frontal system is still approaching the area from the North Pacific, bringing rain to the central and western Aleutian Islands, and some rain showers over the Bristol Bay area as well. We will see some lingering fog from the YK Delta area up through the Point Hope area. Then out over the mainland part of the state, going to see some thunderstorms in the Alaska Range, central and northern portions of the interior, and then rain for south central Alaska extending down into the Panhandle as well, with that onshore flow off of the Gulf. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.